Countdown. 2, 1, all right. Picking up, as I promised from the last taping when I was talking about that you could see, or at least feel, and then once you get the nervous system going, you understand that the feelings is not, that I'm referring to, is not ordinary emotion, but it has to do with a new place wherein your brain is operating, and a place currently, shall we say, vacant. It has maybe a no trespassing sign, but it is actually still fairly feral. But I was speaking of there being reasonably described 2 futures, that there would be a limited future and a loose future. And I only got so far as mumbling on and waving my hands about for a while concerning the limited future. And as promised, I'm going to say a few words about the loose future, and they are... Somebody already laughed. I was going to say the few words were tubers, automatic transmissions, and unpaid holidays. No, all right. Leave us consider that there is a reality, that is, there's energy flowing through man having to do with the health of life. And it comes out in the thoughts and words known as the future. And I have now added my own 4.5 cents worth by defining and attempting to get you to see that there's an area that could be reasonably thought about and used as one being a limited future, one being a loose future. Into the loose future. A loose future, vis-a-vis what I was attempting to describe last time we were taping, and even the terms limited future, when a future, if it did exist, would not be absolutely, unconditionally, non-predetermined. I did not say it would be absolutely predetermined, but you would be dealing with a case, a kind of scenario in that you were trying to picture a more complex reality, more than in 3 or 4 dimensions. I was using 5 dimensions, and whatever was going there in some way is affecting what you can see in the 3 dimensions, which would only be a partial reflection of that kind of activity. So, even from that limited recap, if your brain can operate at such a speed and in such a strange way, you can see that it would be not totally invalid to refer to such a future as a limited future. The loose future. The loose future would be, of course, less specific. It would be less determined. It would be an area wherein you individually might be able to escape more pandemic demands. That which would be generally required, which would fit in now. Some of you may recall I'd already speaking in these terms several tapings ago, but now to turn it into the kind of sketching of having to do with futures, if you took that which seems to be generally demanded, that which ordinary intelligence for a middle class, middle of the bell curve, ordinary sane person in life, that which is demanded of them, all the things from your responsibility to your family, to feelings of nationalism, to feelings of guilt, to whatever it is it takes to be normal, those would be the kind of pandemic generally required futures of everyone. That an ordinary person cannot, in some way, for whatever reason, maybe their son gets killed in some little skirmish while he's in the armed forces of this country. An ordinary person cannot get up the next morning after they've been notified their only son has been killed. They cannot get up the next morning and renounce nationalism, as it's called, which is a form of energy. It's a form of transferring of energy within life's body, we call nationalism. A person, an ordinary person, cannot get up. Therefore, do you see that in this one instance, their future is limited? Because we could sit down and talk about. We could say, well, now I know for a fact, I've already seen the telegram, that this person, we're looking down this house somewhere, anywhere, USA, anywhere, Albania, well, anywhere else. We look down and I say, I know for a fact that their only son was killed yesterday down in that little skirmish where our troops have been trying to uphold a government or whatever, and the people don't know it yet. And here's an example we could tell about limited future. Then you might look at it and then it might strike you, If I was ordinary, then I could say, well, right now we can predict the future because we have additional information. We know that tomorrow, before noon, they will get a telegram delivered by hand from somebody from the Marines saying that they regret to tell you that your son's been killed. So we know that. But now, can we predict the future of these people? Well, now we can look down and we can see the family photographs all throughout the house. We can see that they've left his room like it is. So we can predict that the family really loves him. Then we can look around and we don't see any signs of any other siblings. So he's an only child. And we even see the mother passing constantly by his photograph and always looking. Just almost every time she goes past the photograph, she'll look. And once or twice, tonight, she's even picked up the photograph and kissed it. So we know how much she loves the kid. So what are we going to predict? We can predict she's going to be heartbroken. We can predict this. We could predict they got a flag flying out there of their country. Then if your intelligence got on some kind of wild spree, you might say, well, I can predict this. I bet she'll walk out there, or at least there's a possibility, after she finds out her son's been killed in this little old bitty skirmish, and they're trying to uphold some government that Time magazine says is run by a dictator who is into dressing up like a woman and selling drugs and all kinds of things. So our government had no business sending down troops, and now her son's been killed for no reason. So there's a possibility she's going out there and spit on the flag, or bring it down, or say, never mind this. Now it sounds possible, right? That the woman could be so grief-stricken that she goes, oh my God. And instead of, I love my country, and saluting the flag and having it out there, she may go into a fit. She may pull down the flag. She may begin to go out, and from henceforth, she may go out and go into peace marches. She may start writing obscene, abrasive letters to the congressman. All that's possible, right? It's a quite limited future, though, because that's not going to happen. If it did happen, you do understand this, because I'm addressing, when I say you, I'm addressing you on the basis of assuming that you all can listen and have at the heart of your little nervous system right now a fairly middle-class bourgeoisie, every day walking around sanity as life requires, right in the heart of its own trunk where the human element is extant. The future of this woman vis-a-vis this little scenario, this isolated artificial scene I've made up, is limited in this regard. Unless she did become a mutant, you surely hear me that even this is not going to change her feelings of nationalism. And what greater possibility could this be? Or how about her religious feeling? Let's say she's an absolute dyed-in-the-wool Catholic or Presbyterian, and she finds out her only son has been victimized sexually by a priest, and she's going to find it out tomorrow. Is this woman going to be able to turn, or this man, to turn suddenly and say, to hell with Catholicism, to hell with religion? Now you could say, well, it's possible that in the future, that is tomorrow, it is possible that this one would do that. But all of you, again, I address you, all of you, on the basis that you are middle class in the general area of your intellect right now, just ordinary ones you'd be listening with that you can compare with the rest of life, the way things are wired and primed up, that you do understand that if a person became adamantly anti-clerical, anti-religious because of that, that would be the exception. They would be a mutant. That is not the general future of mankind vis-a-vis that example. So the future is limited. You cannot say, you would be amiss to say, well, this person tomorrow, when they find out their son's been killed, is going to become anti-nationalistic. Or when they find out their priest has been fooling around with their little boy or daughter, they're going to become anti-religious. Sounds possible, but in any case, speaking about the general population of humanity, the future is actually limited, because that is not going to happen. If it does, it's a mutant strain. It's a mutant occurrence, not strain. It's a mutant occurrence which will not produce its own offspring. Just because, and I'm sure, without any doubt, that there's been somebody somewhere, more than once, that was fairly patriotic and found out that their son had been killed, and that was the end of it. You never heard them say another good word about their country, and if they had a flag outside, they let it rot and they didn't replace it. That's quite possible. But notice this, and I'm sure that happened thousands and thousands of years ago. Some Greek family somewhere it happened. during the Peloponnesian Wars, which was bad enough to have to say it, much less fight in it. But that some family somewhere became non-nationalistic. 600 BC. The point is, it did not produce its own offspring. It did not become a strain. That is, it did not stop in the general main of life in humanity feelings of nationalism, patriotism, feelings of religious feelings. It was not stopped. Therefore, can you see quite clearly that to talk about a future, which normally whether the dictionary says it or not, if you took into account a fairly sophisticated connotation of the term freedom, and we talked about, future for a little bit, you'd have to say, well, the future is that which is yet to be executed, that which is yet to be realized. Now I can say, well, you mean, in other words, the future is all things are possible. Now, of course, if you were really intellectual, you'd say, well, yes, except tomorrow, I don't mean that I believe that the laws of gravity will suddenly disappear. Now I say, oh, yeah, I knew that. But you mean tomorrow, in individual cases, that tomorrow a person could get up and be, do, feel, change in almost unlimited ways that did not belie the laws of physics. And most people say, well, yeah, that's what the future is. The future is that which is yet to happen. So we don't know. And I say, well, in other words, the future is almost within physical bounds, that the future is almost synonymous with freedom. And you go, yeah, which shows how dumb you are. No, it doesn't. It shows how limited you are. Because do you see? It's not that hard. But it's hard to remember it because it is not part of the necessities for the general wiring system, the thinking mechanism of people right now. But to see that the future, in any kind of case, you can always draw out a scenario and not having to stretch and look. It's not all that tenuous to just be able to think immediately of a scene wherein something would seem to be possible, that this person can get up tomorrow and feel such and such a way when they are affected by what I know is going to happen. When circumstances change in such a way, it is truly possible tomorrow in the future that they will say or do such and such. And yet to look at it and you realize, no, it's not. If it does happen, it is going to be an anomaly because the future is limited. Then we would have to be talking about, of course, what I assume most of you suspect this is about, whatever it is, this kind of stuff, would be of a different kind of future, a revolutionary future. But it's an individual. It's not a grand plan that life in some way presents through people in the past, or obviously not through me, by me, with my help, in any manner. Of some kind of grand plan of, all right, things are in the middle of a hess, and so what we've got to do is really pull together and straighten it out tomorrow. And of course, tomorrow being somewhat figuratively, at least we'll straighten it out in our lifetimes, or by God, we'll go down trying. You know, such as you're not going to go down if you don't try it. But the revolutionist is always, I'm referring to individual cases, absolutely individual. You can't even really discuss a group of people of 80 or 100 or somebody sitting around or a dozen or somebody sitting around watching these tapes and feeling like, well, that you meet and you see the tapes every week or you attend some meeting. As far as there being a grand design that is going to encompass a dozen people, much less 100, you got a shaky view. It's not anything unusual, and you may not have thought about it that way, but you would think if I ask you that any sort of group coming together, and under ordinary conditions, you would be more valid if we were talking about a book lovers group or a bird watching society. But you would think, if asked, that even something like this, if a group of people become interested in whatever this kind of stuff is and whatever manifestation they might find it, that it has some sort of common message. That is, that you may not mechanically and automatically like all the people that are showing up if you're seeing this at a tape. You might like the way they look or smell or the way they talk. But if you were asked, you would feel, well, we all keep meeting here and we don't kill each other. And the people that even I don't like, they come in, they nod, and they sit down, they watch the tape, and I see that they're interested in it, and they check to be sure what time the next showing is, and they're always here. So there is some kind of, and you'd be tempted to say, well, there's some kind of general plan to this, there's some kind of general design, it has some kind of more encompassing or wider message than just to me. It's not just my interest. That is not only difficult, but probably unprofitable for me to try to wrestle with verbally to deny that. But let me suggest to you that that kind of thinking, that kind of blind, you just never analyze it, thinking that, well, the message is beyond me. I've got my interest, but it's obvious some other people have interest, even people that I don't understand why they're here. I don't understand what their interest is, or I don't like them for some reason. But obviously the message has more than just appeal to me. Don't bet the farm. I mean, it seems to be reasonable that they've got to be coming here for some reason. It's not for the food. There is no such thing to a revolutionist, whatever that may be, to a real explorer. There is no such thing as a general future. There is no such thing as a shared future, even with your best friend, your husband, your wife, your mother, your child. There is no such thing as a shared future. Of course there is. That's the limited future. That is the place wherein all things run their course. It's ordinary life. That's how you know it's ordinary, is things run their course. If you ever need any kind of other way to identify what ordinary life is, ordinary thought is, ordinary relationships, ordinary anything, all you got to do is put the run its course question to it. Did it run its course? And if it did, it was ordinary. That is limited future. It is always shared. You can't escape from it. The woman that finds out her son's been killed, whatever her reaction is, it is not singular. It is not individual. It can't be. As many blanks looks I'm getting, I think I'll just leave that. That's just child's play. You should be able to see that by now. You just never heard it described that way. Ordinary people cannot have an individual future. Do they have individual thoughts? Do they have personal feelings? Because if your answer is inclined to be yes to either of those two questions, if I can, I'll find the valet and have your car brought back around so that you don't you don't have to waste 40 more minutes. Closer to a loose future, being less specific, would be the sorts of things that would be indeed widespread. Not absolutely pandemic, at least, allegorically speaking. All across their intellectual universe, it would be true. That the future is limited because things are going to run their course and their future is shared. I don't mean that they go tell somebody. It's not necessary that this woman goes say, oh, to a neighbor, my son's been killed. I need to talk to someone. It's not that. It's that the general limited future is shared by everybody. It's things running their course. It's the general population. It's ordinary people thinking, and of course doing and feeling, that which seems to be undeniably required, if not decent, humane. Such as, I'm responsible for my children. They drive me nuts, and 2 of them are mass murderers, and the other 3 turned into Republicans, and so. But, you know, I have to take them in. They're all sleeping in the basement now, and you know, what choice have you got? You've got to do that. That is a shared future. That whoever's speaking, that man, that woman, that husband, that wife, about their children, about their family, about their responsibilities because of their business. It's not just that. Don't stop there when I say everybody's future on the ordinary level is shared. Of course it's shared. That their future right then in that area, let's say it was the mother talking about the unruly 5 sons are now living at home and driving her additionally crazy. It's obvious that their future is shared in that one instance. It's not just that though. It's everybody's future is shared. It is the nexus of everything. It's how in the 3D world, as everywhere else, everything's connected, but here you can't even find all the connections and why it doesn't make sense, because some of the connections go into other dimensions. And so you keep trying to find connections that something in me, I'm reasonable, I'm humane, I try to be decent, I got a fairly good education, and I try to live by certain religious, if not moral principles, and I try to think about what in the world is going on, all of the unsavory things, all the irrational actions that go on in life, I try to think about it and figure it out, and I'll just be darned. I think better educated people say that instead of I'll be darned if I can figure out what's going on. It just seems impossible to predict the future. It seems impossible to predict the course of action that our foreign policy is going to take. At times it seems impossible for me to predict tomorrow what our church is going to do. It's changed so drastically in my lifetime. It seems impossible for me to predict my sons. As they were young, they were just the joy of my life. And now they're driving me nuts. It seems hard. How can a reasonable person, and I'm not dumb, but how can a reasonable person predict the future? Well, they can't. But you see how, in a sense, how messy it is. Because they would believe the future, they'd say, well, you're right. If they thought I was insinuating the future is synonymous with freedom, they'd say, well, you're right. Because who would have believed that especially my eldest son, Elmer, he never gave me a bit of trouble. Got a scholarship, combination of folk dancing and soccer. Was studying to be an orthodontist. And suddenly, we find out he began to hold up 7-Eleven stores. So an ordinary person with their ordinary intelligence could say, you're right. If that's what you're saying, the future, in a way, is synonymous with freedom, because I would have never expected that. Never. And yet, in that case, if you want to look at it that way, little Elmer was free to turn into a basket case. But that's not freedom. That's not a future. Elmer didn't have any free future. The father saying this didn't have any free future. We're talking about the general flow of things. We're talking about a shared future. We're talking about a limited future. We're talking about people doing that which they must. In this case, Elmer, we're not going into him. Whatever he did that for. Now, I don't mean some psychological reason for you people out there on tape getting this at another time, another place. Not talking about anything like that. Talking about whatever in life trickled down and made Elmer do that. He did it, but now the father is doing what he must within his limited future. That a father must say something like, I couldn't believe it. I tried to do everything for him, and now sometimes I feel guilty in going through whatever it is people go through nowadays. And we're always out describing, what could I have done different? Well, I can't just turn my back on him and all that. Wherein, individually, I made up the example several tapings ago when I brought this up, and I'll do it again to small shock value, since I can't say the F word because of tape anymore. But the shock value, if it helps you at all. Now, I'm not saying that anybody would do it or that you should do it, but for instance, an individual, a revolutionist, someone that had a looser future, that had some understanding that I'm not going into, but some understanding that there is no particular Elmer that was good or bad. There is no particular me, that is the me that would react to this the way that I'm wanting to talk about it, to whine about it, to be defensive about it, to get angry, whatever it is. And so in that sense, this individual, if he was a revolutionist, or she, could perhaps escape the general requirements. And I'm not saying this literally, but it could be true. It's a little shock to get your attention, or for you to get your own attention. I'm not trying to shock you personally. But a real revolutionist might look around and say, Elmer, did you actually hope those 7-Eleven stores? And of course, just at the same time, you hear sirens and there are cars surrounding your house and they're jumping out with the guns, and Elmer just jumped under a couch. You say, they just called, did you actually do that? And Elmer goes, yeah. You might say, well, Elmer, I'm going off for a while. You and the police work it out. Or if the police threaten to shoot, and it might tear up some of your records or your good books, you might take Elmer and say, stop a minute so I can help you, and then you might kick him out the door. I am suggesting most strongly that which is the general requirement that no sane, ordinary person would argue with. Like, well, you can't do that. Anybody that do that would be less than human. Thank you, thank you. I don't accept compliments. It's a joke. But that individually, the future might be loose enough that the person would have to understand there would be no benefit if somebody did this just mechanically. That is, if somebody did this driven by their own old intelligence. But if somebody who understood the way life is, which I'm not going to try to go into anymore right now, they could, I suggest to you, be free from that kind of limited future requirements. of my country right or wrong, my little Elmer right or wrong, all of those who think they share my future, all my kin, all the people around me, my friends, they're driving me nuts for no reason. I don't have to share their future. You don't have to say it. You don't actually have to kick Elmer out the door into the hands of the polices. You don't have to do any of that. But you can internally, I suggest to you, avoid that kind of limited future. You can avoid that which is generally required. It is just required. There's nothing wrong with being patriotic, nationalistic, racially proud, religiously proud, anything you want to fill in. Decent father. Of course, there's nothing, in a sense, wrong with being an indecent father and unpatriotic. Except notice, that is not the mainstream of life. That is not the general energies needed. And when it occurs, it is mutant time. It is anomaly time. And if it becomes otherwise, then it won't be anomaly time. If it becomes now the requirement in life that people hate their own religion or where they are, that they believe wherever they are, their tribe and their village is the bane on the rump of the universe, then of course that will be the general. And anything, if anybody says, well, you know, I kind of like being around here and I don't like hearing all you people, all my friends and family always bad-mouthing, then that's the mutant. That's the anomaly. So it's not that anything is wrong whatsoever. That doesn't even begin to cover it, but just for you people, especially on tape, it's not that there's anything wrong, there's nothing questionable. That which is generally required of people is generally healthy for life. That's why it's required. But an individual here and there may find that their future is not necessarily limited to the shared future of everybody else, which is a limited future. And the very kinds of things that verbally would sound to be irreligious, chauvinistic, just inhumane, I suggest you are not necessarily so, because those are just words. And if you substituted inhumane, if you substituted that for eggplants, sacrilegious, if you substituted, instead of saying sacrilegious, if you said cotton candy, what's the difference? I was mentioning ordinary stuff running its course. One thing about a loose future would be, and the way to describe it, was that ordinary things do not run their ordinary course because you would see to it that they did not in you. You can't do it out there. Doesn't mean that you can't have a hobby. But things are going to run their course ordinarily is because that's why they're ordinary. They're going to run their course inside of ordinary people, which keeps them ordinary. It keeps a limited future alive. It keeps the future being shared. It keeps humanity serving this general purpose. But a looser future would be wherein you do not let things run their course necessarily in you. Such as you just find out that your only son, the little one you used to dress up in his little sailor suit, and you used to just hope that he'd become an orthodontist. And now you find out he's been arrested as a peeping Tom. A felonious peeping Tom, whatever that would be. A man who tommed and peeped in a serious, dangerous, publicly dangerous manner. For things to run their course, what it would be, do I have to go through it again? If you're an ordinary father or mother, just think of all the things you would ordinarily go through. Maybe at first disbelief, and then a few minutes later the police are sure, oh yeah, it's him, we got photographs of him doing, we caught him. And then you get mad, then you get hurt, then you go through, I don't know what the latest is on the Donahue show, you go through some process of being angry, then you deny it, then you get angry again, then you feel guilty, and then you go sigh and you have to accept it, and then you have to go down there and embarrass yourself and stand there in court next to your son or behind him while they're trying him, and the newspapers pick it up, your name's in the paper, the father of this country's only felonious peeping Tom. that would be, let us say, things running their course. But if you were intelligent in a way that was outside the limits of that kind of shared future, may I suggest again the possibility that running its course, as soon as you found out, they come to arrest him, and you say, are you sure it's him? They showed you photographs, and in fact Elmer goes, yeah, and he admits it. That might be as far as the course ran. But, what are you going to do? And that's not a real question. What a revolutionist, I suggest, would do is not do that, which would be things running their course. To what avail? Well, sure, it'd make life happy, as if life would notice you, one more little cell doing what it should. You know, how often do you sit around every morning or every night and say, thank you, great universe, great cosmic powers, for all of my individual molecules, and let me begin to count. Who knows how many molecules, how many cells are in a liver? I don't think about it. I suggest that you wouldn't get much sleep, that if you just had to say, thank you for the first cell over here, and thank you for that cell next to that, and thank you for that cell, you might say, well, I'm glad I'm in good health. Thanks a lot. But who's got time to notice that each little liver cell today, of course, maybe not all of them, maybe some of them are still trying to get over those great drinking bouts you used to engage in the 60s. And so some of them are still staggering around, dried up and real hard. But the ones that are still functioning, who's going to notice? You're just happy to be alive, right? That was the only reason I was going to say, as if life had time to notice that you were doing your job. But outside of it, noticing whether you did your job would be the possibility of you stopping, you individually. Not because I tell you to, not because I tell you you should, because you shouldn't, not because I tell you that life wants you to, because it don't, and not because I tell you that if you do it in some way you'll make me happy, because who the hell cares? You've got to want to, for whatever reason. Well, I didn't mean to describe it. Is to not have things run their course when you come up with your own definition of this. Not verbally, but your own definition of, boy, that's annoying. Remember, that's where I started this, or that's the description I used a few tapings ago. I could say things like, well, this is unprofitable psychologically. If I keep going around and picking up, allegorically speaking, after little Elmer, he'll never learn his lesson. So I'm going to pretend I'm mad and I'm not going down to the police station. Oh, I'll check on him. I'll have our lawyer check, and maybe I'll pay somebody to get arrested and go down and be in an adjoining cell and send me back reports. And I'll send down money surreptitiously, and I'll have them bring him his favorite food at least every night or so. But I'm going to teach him a lesson. It's not that kind of apparent psychological dealing. It would be that you're not letting it run its course on the basis of your own, and now it's a blank. Because there's no grand design for me to tell you. And there's no point in me trying to leave some of you blank, but that's why I was trying to hint at that little example. You could describe, as ordinary people would, which was valid enough at a simplistic 3D level, as I was just going through, that the Father, based upon a kind of 3D reality, kind of psychological, sophisticated, up-to-date reality for the general public, for old intelligence, could say that psychologically I'm beginning to think that me continuing to try and take up for little Elmer's missteps in life are not necessarily beneficial to little Elmer, who's now 36. That maybe I shouldn't jump right in and bail him out of this. Maybe I ought to let him sweat overnight and not even show up at the police station. It's not that. And it's not anything that is verbally describable for me to say that it's, well, sitting around and you think, well, he's given me so much trouble. I bailed this kid out now for 36 years, but Jesus, here I am, I'm 62, I don't have much longer to live. Why should I put up with this crap? And then try to get mad at him. There is no real verbal description. It would have to be, there is no grand design to this. There's nothing for me to tell you. It would have to be on your own. And this, you cannot be operating at the old ordinary level of intelligence or you're not doing anything. But at some new place in your own brain would have to be that this scenario arises wherein you are driven to be part of things running their course. In my example of a child, one of your children giving you additional grief. It'd have to be for some reason. And I'm just going to say, who knows what reason? It's not my business. It's not your business. Not your old business. As to why. But that's why I liked the description, personally, a few nights ago, when I was asking, why would a real person, why would anybody with any real intelligence put up with stuff that annoys them? Now, it sounds pretty crude to ordinary people to say, wait a minute, you're going to include your son as stuff? Why put up with stuff that annoys you? So for whatever reason, and it'd be nonverbal, I assure you, that here it is, to stick with this little picture again, your child has done this. God, I hate to do this, but some of you are looking blank. I'll go ahead for some reason. And it's not for any known reason. No known reason. I mean, I know the reason, but I can't tell you. And if you knew the reason, you'd understand. Well, you couldn't tell me because that ain't the reason. You decide at a new place that there is a degree of annoyance has been reached that you're going to change the channel. You're just going to abandon it until further notice. Not tell anybody necessarily you're going to abandon it. That's not the point. You just abandon it. You become individually free from that which is, in the 3D sense, universally required of people. That is a kind of loose future. It is not specific, it is not predetermined, and it is not a future that is shared. That is, you did not do it based on imagined psychological connections or ramifications between you and your progeny. It is more of an isolated individual, and I don't mean isolated in a pejorative sense, because it's in a new place where you are functioning intellectually. This new place finds this, I could say unprofitable, I could say less than inspiring, useful, and it's none of that really. It's even better, although that's not it, it's better to say the new place. Here it is. After all these years, you finally got a new area of your brain going, and it's suddenly confronted with a 36-year-old person known as Little Elmer, who's back in trouble. And all at the old building sites, everywhere that your intellect ordinarily operates, is right in the middle of things running their course, whatever they may be. And let us say that you're to the point that you can stand and operate to a large degree in this new area. And this new area is confronted with the noise coming from over the fence at the old building projects and the old sites about Little Elmer this, Little Elmer that, peeping Toms and lawyer fees, the whole thing. In this new area, if it spoke in such a way, just finds all this very annoying. And very annoying, I suggest, is an inflammatory put down. If any of you found any juice, if not nourishment, over me asking the question about why would a really intelligent person put up with anything, with stuff that annoys them, I suggest that only a limited future, only those in a limited future will put up with stuff that annoys them. Well, I got to admit, they don't have much choice because they can't really tell, nobody can, what annoys them at that level. They say they can. You say, really? And they say, oh yeah. You say, well, how do you put up with it? Well, you don't understand. No. They don't understand. Because you say, well, why do you're really annoyed by the way your wife does you. Your husband, yeah? How long have you been married to that guy? 42 years. And you're saying that the biggest pain in your life, you're just sure that you've got ulcers and high blood pressure because of him, yeah. He's that annoying. Huh. Well, why do you put up with it? You don't understand. No, I understand. But that ain't the point. They don't understand. Because they're not annoyed. It would take somebody with a new kind of intelligence to know, to be able to separate that which is annoying from that which is not annoying. Much less to be able to separate that which I may individually be able to avoid from that which none of us can avoid. There's no sense even dreaming about it. Last time we were taping, I somewhat, in a manner en passant, threw in how easily, how readily it trips from many tongues throughout history of people here and there under all kinds of institutional and individual guises try to say something about their belief that there may be some kind of super information, some kind of grand design of which man's not yet aware, and if it be true, then this kind of information has to be coming to people, or it has to be available, but obviously somewhere beyond our five senses. How easily that trips from the tongues of the Greeks and the Chinese 6,000 years ago, right up until somebody in some kind of New Age movement, or to your own nervous system today saying, yes, I do believe there is information that's not readily available, some kind of transcendental data, but it obviously would come to man, could only come to us beyond the five senses. Hence is why I smoke this stuff, take these mushrooms, get drunk, chant, whatever it is. Or imagine, just think about it, and just imagine another mode of perception wherein information comes to me beyond the five senses. Somebody's always been saying that, and there's always been an audience. That is, it's in part of life's nervous system. And it's not all that much of an anomalistic strain that there'll be an audience going, yeah. And you just get on past that, go on and tell me what it is. Let's hear some more. When, if ordinary people could think in a way that the dictionary says is ordinary intelligence, nobody would say that was intelligent. No one would nod along, because there is no sign nobody can imagine. There is no way that the people who say it and the people that nod along that yes, if there is some sort of extraordinary information, it would have to come to us beyond, outside the limits of our five senses. And everybody goes, yeah. And so what's your particular theory? How? Because everybody agrees that's interested in that yeah. Not yeah. There is nothing in the ordinary human nervous system. There's nothing in old intelligence to give an iota of credence to that. There's not one place, there's not one experience that an intelligent person, I'm not talking about somebody that swoons after drinking 20 gallons of mescaline mixed up with muscatel, and then them saying that the spirit of a dead winemaker or a little Indian spoke to them. I'm talking about somebody fairly intelligent that might believe such as that, and you say, well, how'd they know that the spirit spoke to them? Well, they heard it. But no, wait a minute. They didn't actually hear the voice speak. They heard it, inside in their soul. And if you say, well, in their soul, what do you mean? I mean, where is the soul? And they say, well, nobody really knows. It's like, but inside, that is, they didn't hear it audibly. It wasn't a voice out there. It was like the spirit spoke to them inside. But you do understand by now, if they were intelligent at all, this has nothing to do with religion. It has nothing to do with anything other than the laws of physics in the 3D world, the limits of reality, and the very scope of ordinary people's mode of intellectual perception wherein they belie their own experience. Because if you said, all right, you're talking about voices inside, well, that means inside they had to think about the voice. I mean, the voice said some kind of word, nobody heard but them, but they had to think, it had to translate to get in their brain to them go, yeah, I'm hearing the voice. And you'd have to say, well, yeah. And then, of course, you couldn't prove this to anybody. That's not the point to argue with them. But if they were just walking around intelligent in the ordinary sense, as they claim to be, then they would see, well, there is no possible information, or there's nothing that anyone's ever experienced I can't even imagine. When I try and imagine, and I sit alone by myself and think, all right, I'm going to, nobody's watching, I'll be as unreasonable, as irrational as I can be, and I'll imagine the strangest kind of information that might be out there in the universe that might come to me. And I'm not going to do it through my five senses. That's how weird I'll be. Nobody's watching. Well, grunt and squint, do anything you want to. But there is no way, no reason, not even a piece of evidence or suspicion that anything can reach you as some kind of information, as some kind of impression, as some kind of sensation, without it going through the five senses. But note, again, why I was going to point out this paragraph, people have said it, not idiots, people are respected historically. Just casually say it. That wasn't the point of whatever they're saying. They just say, well, we all know, of course, that I'm here from the gods or the great spirits, or I'm here with a great message for all of us. But the kind of message is the kind of stuff, because I know all of you are a select group that'll get the grand design going, this information is not the kind of thing that just comes through the five senses. And everybody goes, yeah, and that's just a comma. That's not the end of it, because then they're going to say, well, and I'm here to give you that because it's not readily available, and here it comes. All right, we're all ears. Right. Right, I don't want to talk about it. I'm going to write it down, and here it is. I'm going to hold it up. All right, we're all eyes. Or I'm going to come out, and I'm going to massage your head and your neck, and I'm going to impart this information without even talking to you. All right, here I am. Come fill me up. That's it. What I wanted you to consider past that point, if you had a thinking that was based more in time, which would be a 4D world from the view of ordinary intelligence here, if you had a kind of thinking that was based more in time than in space, then you would have grounds for new information. You would have the possibility of a different site, a different area of receiving that you could get information. Now this, I guess I'll wait a hell of a time, 15 minutes into the tape to start this. This does not contradict what I was saying, that there's no information. Never has been. No basis, no even ordinarily three-dimensional reasonable basis for people believing, for saying, for agreeing that, oh yes, well, great information always has come to a few people beyond the five senses. Oh yes, no doubt about that. This does not belie that. But if you're thinking, being two possible types I was going to start even last time and didn't, and obviously not going to finish tonight, that there would be what amounts to thinking in space, which is ordinary thinking, just within the confined, limited operations of ordinary intelligence. And then there would be that, and counterpoint to that would be a thinking in time. Now the idea that there would be information that might be not readily available, that might be some kind of super information. Okay. And if there is, it obviously is not going to come about, never has come about, could not come about through the auspices of our five senses. Oh no, you're right, yeah, so go on. Three-dimensional, that's not true. But even while you're alive here on this planet, at this level, if your thinking got more in time, if it was based more in the 4D world, a continuing awareness of time, not just theoretical, not just in Einstein Revisited for high school students, but that actual time is a dimension. I sure have been tempted a long time to make up another word for time, because everybody, like everything else, goes, oh yeah, I know what time is. And no, you don't. But it's another dimension. Oh yeah, well I read that even the first time I read Einstein for Idiots. I read that little paperback. And he said, yes, time's just another dimension. And plus, I watch Star Trek on TV, and they're always talking about the space-time continuum. So I know it's the whole. But if your thinking was based more in time than in space, do you understand? You would not be then looking. You would not be thinking in such a way as life being episodic. You would not be seeing it as the three-dimensional lines that seem to be indeed sequential of things causing one thing. Well, I have an upset stomach now, my blood pressure is going up, and I know why. It's because they come to arrest little Elmer again. You know, why is he in trouble again? And his wife says, well, I think it's because you used to laugh at him when he tried to folk dance. Well, you could be right. I guess that's what caused it. Well, why were you so bad about that? You were a good father than that. Oh, I don't know. My mother said that she was frightened by a ballet dancer one time over in the old country. She thought this guy was going to leap off the stage and land in her lap and mash her kumquats. So but all of this is a limited. All of this is thinking in space. All of this is thinking in the area wherein everybody's future is shared. You are thinking that which is going to run its course. If you could think in time, as opposed to being able to simple limited thinking in space, then that kind of thinking would offer what would amount to new grounds for thought. That is, the dreamed of area of some kind of new information outside the five senses. But I repeat, I'm not saying that this is in absolute three-dimensional contradiction. I'm not saying that this is information outside the senses, because there is no 5 sense or 6 sense right now operational in man that handles time. I mean, sure, you can look at the watch and you can go through all this stuff of saying, well, I know what you mean. I read Einstein and I know something about new physics, and I know that time is a dimension, and you can plot it out and say that to locate anything in space, you even need to know how to locate it in time to say, well, we know where a rocket will be. We got all these projections. We've got computers that will tell us if we're going to fire a rocket towards Siberia, But also we got to take into consideration time. You got to say, well, what time it will be going over the Bering Strait, what time it will be approaching one of the Russian installations. So I know all that time's part of the three-dimensional world. You don't know that. The human nervous system is not wired up. You do not think in time. You can take what they call time into consideration while making limited projections. They may be quite useful and necessary mathematically, operationally in the military, in all sorts of ways. But you are not wired up to think of time as being a continual dimension. You're simply not. No argument to it. If you think there is, and I think the valet's got your car. If it doesn't, it's got somebody's car. And, take a ride. It gives you more, when I say grounds, offers grounds for a new thought, whereas thinking in space does not. See, thinking in space, thinking what space is, there are literally material, that is physical, as you would normally want to call it, limits to what you can think if you're thinking in space, which is the basis that I used to pull out that picture of saying if you did try to talk to your ordinary brain and say that it had limits and it was operating in a digital manner without any conversion necessary, that it has its own limits, it cannot think past itself, and if, you recall the one I made up, that if you looked at the brain as it is now, your own intellect, as being this, as big as you want it, 40 acres, 40,000 acres, 40 billion acres, and there's this fence around it. Like any good field, the fence around it, if you want to look at it, is being the three-dimensional extension, the outer layer of your own brain. That is, anything past this fence is non-brain. It's the fluid, it's the skull, it's everybody else. So the fence is simply, I'm using that is the limits of your brain. And you tell it, hey, you got limits. And if the fence is the thinking part, it's like an electric fence, it will run all the way around and come back and tell you, I have looked. I took it seriously, what you said. I have looked. I ran the perimeter. It doesn't say that, but it ran the perimeter of itself, seeking high and low for any limits, any fence. There are none. The limits is that which is speaking. If you're thinking in space, you can never see the limits, which is why people say, well, once you put it that way, the future is freedom, because within certain physical demands, tomorrow's unknown. My future's unknown. What I may say next is unknown. What I may do tomorrow is not absolutely predictable. Thinking in space has quite literally, but unrecognized, material, physical limits. Whereas if your thinking was more based in time, in a four-dimensional world, which you live there, even the people as I was speaking for, at almost nowadays, I guess, a high school level in the Western world part of life's body on this planet, would say, well, yeah, we're all living in time. We actually live in a four-dimensional world. You shouldn't keep even saying, I've seen some of your tapes, and you keep saying three-dimensional world. We're more up to date. You should be saying we live in a four-dimensional world. And so there are people that will say that, but their thinking is not based in time. If it was, nobody could be a critic. Nobody would be cynical. The words such as irony would just disappear from the dictionary, because if you thought in time, there is no such thing as irony. If your thinking is based in time, you cannot look around and see, well, my God, this group of people started out as a peace organization, because I remember when they first got started. That was no more than 6 months ago, and here I read in the paper, they've been arrested right outside Ankara. They're in fistfights with a bunch of Muslims. They're in fistfights with a bunch of errant Bulgarians on a spree. How ironic. Or how ironic, the Catholic Church being a mass murderer in the name of confess, or we'll have to. How ironic. Or how about this? How ironic it is that I have given my whole life to little Elmer. And evidently, my payoff is going to be a terminal broken heart. Is that irony? No. If you can think in space and time, it's not ironic, because for something to be ironic, it has to end up being what seems to be a conclusion, an outcome that is in contradiction, in opposition to the premise. And so, as I point out, if you wait long enough, it was either me or Kyrute, if you wait long enough, everything is finally ironic. You are. Everything you ever believed, your loves, your hates for people. There would be somebody that you hated that you thought used to annoy you when you were a kid, and then one day, 50 years later, in a blinding snowstorm, you drive off of a bridge, and you're freezing to death, and somebody saves your life, and they pull you out, and you look up later in the hospital, and somebody tells you who it was, and it was this guy that you hated all these years. Is that ironic or what? Huh? If your thinking was based more than time, it was more in time, there's no such thing as irony. It's just life. There's no such thing as criticism. There's no such thing as ordinary aggression. There's no such thing as sarcasm. There's no such thing as an ordinary acceptance that there is an unfettered freedom in the future. Thinking in space is as limited as living in space. If you're thinking in space, the future, not just behavioral-wise, not just your physical future, because your physical future, yours and mine, at the 3D level, is fairly predictable. That is the big D. Or is that the big C? That's cancer. The big D is what? Dandruff? I always forget. All right. But your future would not be so predictable, but not just behavior-wise, in here-wise, that it's limited to what you can ever think, as long as you're thinking in space. And even thinking in space, remember, you can think thusly. All right, I heard that most people think in space, and so even if that's true, I don't really understand, but even if that's true, right now, I'm going to stop it. I'm not sure how, but here I go. Right now, I'm not going to think in space. I'm going to think some other way. Well, at least I'll be aware of the fact that I'm trying not to think in space. Get away from here, you old thinking in space, you. I wash my hands of the operations of thinking in space. You can say that, but surely you hear me. It's the same thing as telling the fence, which is the normal. It could be brilliant from the 3D level. Nobel Prize winning brain. But the fence is the thinking part. It's the speaking part. And you tell it, hey, you're fenced in. You're not free. You can't just wander off and think anything you want to. Oh, yes, I can. No, you're fenced in. Wait a minute, I'll check it. And the fence can't see it. Space cannot see itself. No dimension can see itself at that level. If you're thinking more in time, here is at least verbally, I'll end with here is what would verbally be, I guess I could stretch it and say ironic compared to what I was saying, because if you could think in time, what it amounts to is thinking in time gives you more room to think. That is, more space to think. Because if you think in time, then you're freed from the ordinary limitations of things running their course. And therefore, everything else that's reasonable to everybody else, it's not unreasonable to you. It's just they're chopping it up. Somebody's trying to describe the beauties of a great, almost infinitely sized grazing herd of cattle. They're trying to describe it to you by holding up a sausage patty. And you can't say, well, that's got no relationship at all. Well, of course, some of you laughed. It's even more than that, because it's more than just the beauty of a cow. And then an infinite herd, it's the people who are herding the cows. It's the sheep outside your view of the cows. It's all the birds. It's everything. But to take one that seems verbally demonstrable, you're holding up a sausage patty, or a link, a hot dog, and it's not that it has no correlation whatsoever to a herd of cattle, but that is thinking in space. That is ordinary, reasonable, seriatim, serial, sequential, linear, ordinary thought. And if that makes sense to you good people, then as that great philosopher, I guess, Jimmy Swaggart or somebody would say, is, God bless you and go with God. That is, go with your limited thoughts. And since it's such a warm night, I'm going to stop 15 seconds early.